Hello, everybody. It's Nick and Chelsea Jerusalem with the Jerusalem's Happy Home team. And thank you so much for tuning in to our Building Wealth Through Real Estate virtual class. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump in. We're doing a quick 1 hour crash course on how to build wealth through real estate. And so I'm just going to share our screen here. All right, so this just real fast, kind of a little bit about who the Happy Home team is. This is kind of the picture we could put on our Christmas cards. That's our mom and dad on the side there. The gals in the middle, we love like family, but they're not blood. But so our family's been in the business since 1989. More importantly, we're still here. Our father started in the real estate side back in '89, and about 12 years ago, stepped out from the day-to-day of the real estate sales and now runs our mortgage division. So we have lots of mortgage options available as well. And each one of us has a very specific role within the team, but most importantly, just making sure that we always have somebody here to help you. So Chelsea's going to kind of cover the topics of our class today.
Yeah, so today we're going to be going over a number of things. It's going to be a bit of an information fire hose. But what we've got going on for today's topics is first we'll start with a little market update of just kind of where we're at today. And then we'll talk about acquiring your first investment property, just different ways you can do the acquisition of the first property. Tax advantages of real estate investing, just why you can save a lot of money on your taxes by making a real estate investment happen, financing and options, different ways to acquire the property using other people's money, creative down payment sources, the power of leverage, short-term rentals versus traditional rental, sweat equity, and like that, from converting a property to building a new property, condos, multifamily, and ADUs, just kind of what are those different products, and management options, what happens when you do have an investment property, and then Q&A. At the end, we'll do a little wrap up with any questions anyone's got so we can go over those.
All right, so a quick market recap just on why real estate could be a good investment. So let's look at where it's been to sort of get a sense of where it might be going from here. So most kind of notable to highlight is the Great Recession, which went from 2007 when homes had at that time peaked at 481 and then bottomed out in February of 2012. Prices dropped about $180,000 in 5 years. Then over the next 5 years, they doubled. They went up to over 600,000 by 2017. We hit a bit of a headwind and stalled out in 2018 and 19. There was a little bit of a economic recession in the end of 2019, as some people may recall. And then we've been on sort of this massive run up ever since sort of the economic boom that's come during the COVID and pandemic era. So during which time we've seen double-digit appreciation over these last 2 years. And what's been driving that is greatly driven by very limited supply and high demand in our local area due to favorable interest rates up till now, and also very strong job prospects in the area. So this is looking back at our housing supply all the way from the early 2000s until now. So we can see back in 2008, the inventory peaked at over 17,000 homes for sale. This is for King County single family homes. At the beginning of the year in January, we hit an all-time low of only 850 homes on the market for a county with over 2 million people. So you can just imagine there was this huge compression. Anybody who wanted to buy a home had nothing to choose from. Interest rates were now starting to creep up quickly, kind of in that in the February, March timeframe. And now we are starting to see a little bit of relief on inventory. It's almost doubled from March to April, but it still barely is up year over year from April last year. And we're still at, as you can see here, near all-time lows for inventory levels. Interest rates, so that kind of has been driving a lot of the demand side of things, along with the jobs, as I mentioned. But so right now, interest rates are averaging around 5.3% for a 30-year mortgage. This is also for owner-occupied properties. So if you were to buy a property as an investment purchase, typically they have around a 1% premium on the rate for that. So this is looking at specifically owner-occupied rates. Interest rates peaked back in 1981 at 18%. They hit an all-time low in January of last year in 2021. They hit 2.65%. Over the last 50 years, though, mortgage rates have averaged 7.8%. So a lot of people are kind of freaking out about rates in the fives. When I bought my first place back in 2005, it was 6.85% on an interest-only loan. And I think we're going to start seeing things like 5-year adjustable rate mortgages coming back into play as people trying to get their rates and payments down. Maybe whether or not we'll see interest-only payments coming back into favor. We'll see. But and then just kind of a perspective from the beginning of the year till now. So the median price in January was $794 for a house in King County, and interest rates at the time were 3.55%. So your principal and interest payment would be a little under $2,900 a month. Today, the median price has gone up 200 grand since January. That's a big run up. If you own investment properties, that's a big boost to your net worth. And if you're trying to get in, that makes it a little bit trickier. And then rates have also increased to 5.3%. So now to buy the median price home at the average interest rate, your payment's $4,400 a month. So it's almost $1,600 more a month than what it may have been for the like kind home in January. So you can imagine that's going to put some headwinds into our appreciation as people are sort of getting reacclimated to what the new norm is.
All right, so acquisition of your first investment property. There's a few different types of properties that you could start with. So one way is to purchase a primary residence that you intend to convert into an investment property. So buying a home that would have all the characteristics that would make it also become a good rental property, having good access to schools, not having crazy acreage that you'd have to maintain. So those types of things that you would want as a home for yourself that also could convert well into being an investment property. You could also purchase a property solely for the purpose of renting it out. So with that, if you do buy a investment property, you can use up to 75% of the anticipated rental income to offset your debt to income ratios. So they'll anticipate that you're going to make X amount of dollars on the rent. They'll take it down to the 75%, or if you do have a signed lease, they'll take 100% of that anticipated rent and already add that into
tax returns.
Your income.
Yeah, if the signed lease has been on your tax returns, they'll count 100% of that lease income. Otherwise, if it's anticipated or not 2 years of tax history rental income, they'll give you 75%. They have a vacancy allowance that they build into that.
Yes, so it's 75% if you are at the time of acquisition, but then they'll use it in the future. You can use 100% of it. Purchasing a multi-family property, excuse me. So that would be like a duplex or a fourplex. Up to 4 units is a conforming property. If you get more than 5 units, then it becomes a commercial loan product and is a different type of thing. But with 4 units or less, you could move into one of the units, and it's an owner-occupied property. So you can buy it with purchase 5% down as an owner-occupied property, but then you can use the 75% of the anticipated income from the other units to offset for you to be able to qualify. And then the other option is to purchase a second home. So that would be something that you're considering using for yourself, and also using as like an Airbnb type of property and having income come up from it that way. And so in order to purchase that property, you again are getting a lower down payment. You can get that with 10% down, although you are paying the same rates as an investment property. So both an investment home and a second home have about a point higher in rate than if you are going to buy it for yourself as an owner-occupied property. So you're going to pay about 1 point higher for either of those options, but you can potentially use the 75% of rental income if you're doing the multifamily or the traditional rental purchase. Our first purchases. So Nick and I happened to, both of our purchases were both in the same condo complex. I was a little bit ahead of him just because of my life timing. I'm a little older, but we both purchased in Fairway Greens. It was a neighborhood that my father already had. He already had a couple of units in there, so we knew that it worked well as a rental. It was an on-site property manager, so if anything happened, we didn't have to run out there to go fix a toilet or something like that. We knew that there was someone there to deal with that type of thing. So that was also a nice added bonus of what came with the HOA fees. And then with this, I used a home equity line of credit from this property in order to use for me to qualify for my next property. So over the years. By the time it was 2007, so I acquired the property in 2004. By 2007, I had enough equity in the property that I didn't pull the equity out to use as like a down payment for the next property, but I used the home equity line of credit to pay off my short-term debt so that it could be spread out over a 30-year term, and that adjusted my debt to income ratios so that I could qualify for the next purchase.
Yeah, and then I bought my property in there, a little 2-bed, 1-bath condo while I was in college. It was 2005. I was 20. I rented out to a couple friends of mine. I did a 0 down stated income interest only loan and lived at home and commuted to school. My friends lived there. And then after I graduated, my wife and I moved into the condo, remodeled everything ourselves, had a lot of things that were original from the 1970s. And in the 2 years after I bought it, it went from 96,000 that I bought it for up to like around 150,000. And I felt like, oh, I'm the smartest guy in the world. I made this $50,000 equity. I can do this all day long. I tapped into the equity. And then of course it was 2007. So that was right when the real estate market started to correct, right as I was going full time into that career. And so my wife and I ended up riding it out for a while. We lived there. We moved out in 2010. Rented it out for a number of years at a loss. At one point, I saw values get all the way down like to $39,000 for a 2-bed condo, which is what they sold for brand new in the 70s. And so the values got up to 150,000 thereabouts in 2016. And so we sold it, and I regret that because now they're worth 230, 240. They're renting out for, close to $2,000 a month. We'd be cash flowing significantly. We could pay it down aggressively. And Chelsea actually just paid hers off within this last year. So she owns a free and clear rental while she's still in her 30s. So good for you.
Yes, my end story is a bit different than Nick's. So when I made the move to the house, I actually rented the condo out, and I did have a signed lease in hand. So I was able to use the rental income from the condo as part of my qualifying income. And then at that time, though, it was $750 a month. And now it is renting for $1,500 a month. And as Nick mentioned, I just paid it off the beginning of this year. So I now own it free and clear, and it's all generating income to me, although I do have HOA fees that I still have to pay on a monthly basis.
And good old property taxes.
And taxes.
Speaking of taxes, so some tax advantages of real estate. So yeah, Chelsea, take us away.
All right. So when selling your primary residence after 2 years of ownership, you're exempt from capital gains taxation up to $500 if you're filing jointly, and $250 if you're doing single filing. Mortgage interest is tax deductible up to $750,000 on your primary and second home. Property tax deductions of $10,000 per year on your primary residence, so you can get the taxes reduced on your income taxes. And then rental property depreciation on the physical structures and improvements. So you can do rental property depreciation. They depreciate the structure itself. So it's just, if it's a condo, then you're just the structure. If you own a house, they'll remove the price of the land itself, because they won't depreciate the land, but they will depreciate the building, the structure, and any improvements on the property. And they calculate that based on about a 27.5-year lifespan, and then depreciate it over time. And then the other thing that's a nice tax advantage of real estate is that you can borrow against the asset without having to pay income taxes. So if you do a HELOC or a refinance or pull a second mortgage, you have that money that you can use to spend, but it's not counted as income. So you don't have to spend income taxes when you acquire that money, unlike if you cash out your stocks.
And lastly,
last but not least, we've got the 1031 exchange. So that is a nice option that they give you. So the 1030 tax exchange will allow you to, if you go to sell your property and you're within that capital gains risk, instead of having to absorb those capital gains, you can do a 1031 exchange and buy a new asset with the proceeds of the sale of that initial asset. And you could even use the proceeds from the sale to buy multiple replacement properties. You just have to make sure you're doing it within the vehicle of the 1031 exchange, which you need a 1031 facilitator, and make sure you're doing it the right way. But it's fully worth doing if you're planning on making those moves to avoid that capital gains tax.
So other ways you can kind of gain tax advantages are from just a monthly cash flow perspective, is that the mortgage interest is tax deductible, and you can kind of sort of readjust what you have from your tax withholdings to make up for that. So as sort of a napkin math example, we're saying a $500,000 loan amount at 5% interest rate, you'd have a $2,700 a month payment. That would be for just the principal and interest. You'd also have things like property taxes, homeowners insurance, and what have you, but this is just for the tax calculation. So of that $2,700 a month, $2,100 a month would be just going straight to interest, and then $600 a month would go actually towards paying down the principal over the life of that 30-year loan. So if you're paying $2,100 a month in interest over 12 months, that's approximately $25,000 a year that you have in mortgage interest. So that's now a $25,000 tax deduction that you didn't have until you own that home. So if you made $70,000 instead of paying income tax on that full amount, you now get to pay income tax on the $45,000 adjusted basis. And so if you're, let's say, in the 30% tax bracket, a $25,000 tax deduction could save you $7,500 in taxes, that you'd be having to pay Uncle Sam that year. So which works out to $625 a month in savings. And so what you could actually do is go to your employer and have them change how much they withhold in taxes based upon you now owning this home and having a greater tax deduction than you had before. So, and so the other way to kind of look at that is that, your payment was $2,700 a month, but now you're essentially saving $625 a month in taxes as far as your net at the end of the day. And so that kind of effectively makes your payment more like a $2,075 a month payment, if you will. So.
Yes. And all right. And then this is showing how rents go up. This is what makes being a landlord or just owning your own home extremely smart, because if you buy a home for 30-year fixed rate, you're set at your same payment for 30 years. So your mortgage payment is $1,500 a month. It's going to be $1,500 a month from year 1 to year 30. That's your mortgage payment, unless you
or it could go down if rates go down.
I guess it could go down. But you will not have anybody adjusting that up on you when you're in your fixed mortgage. So then year 1, we're talking about rents are up over 155% over the last 20 years. We're doing a modest 6% annual appreciation in our calculation here. So at 6% appreciation, you're in the same rental property 10 years later. That same $1,500 a month has become $2,686 a month for the same space. If you still proceed to have that same property, your tenant is paying you $4,810 a month while you're still paying your $1,500 a month payment. And then you hit year 30 and they're paying you $8,615 a month for the same property that you're free and clear on. You're only paying taxes and insurance. And if they happen to still be there, year 40, which this is crazy, but this is true, it would be $15,420 a month in rent that you will be receiving.
Yeah, so it's the power of compounding time and interest here. So, and then this is also how you can kind of make the compounding interest work for you. So with your mortgage, essentially over the 30-year life of the loan, the bulk of the payment is front loaded towards going to just interest. In that example, we said a $500,000 loan, $2,700 payment, only $2,100 was going towards interest, $600 was going towards principal. So it's not until the back end of the loan that you really start aggressively paying down the principal. So one way you can really accelerate paying off the property is if you just make one extra payment a year, that can pay off, that can accelerate 7 years in terms of shortening the lifespan of your loan. So going back to the example we showed about the increasing cash flow based on just the 6% appreciation, you can obviously pocket that cash flow and use it however you like, but it can also reinvest it and just accelerate paying down the property. And even just with one extra month's payment a year, you get to take 7 years off the life of that. So
7 years closer to that all being money in your pocket instead of being money you're sharing. But your write-offs go away when you pay off the property. There's the downside.
On the interest, yeah.
On the interest. All right, financing options. So there's a number of different financing options out there. but there's, most people, there's the traditional financing, the Freddie and Fannie, the FHA, conventional, FHA products that are out there, also VA loans. If you're so lucky to have qualified for, I guess, done the work to have qualified for a VA loan to be able to get the 0 down option, that is also out there and available. There's also hard money loans. Those are generally much higher interest rate, 12 to 15 to 20%, depending on what you're looking at. But that's for more of a short term. People usually will use a hard money product on something that doesn't qualify so well for a traditional loan. So with the traditional financing products, they do want the home to be in at least a reasonable condition that is going to be livable and not just fall apart on them, because it is an asset for the loan. And as security for the loan, they want to make sure it's not just going to fall over. So if the property is on the edge of falling over, you might not be able to get those financing options. So a hard money could be an option for you to be able to get the property, do some fix-ups to it to get it to the point where it can qualify for traditional financing, and then refinance into a traditional product, or do a flip, sell the property before you have to make too many of those payments, because it's definitely not a long-term plan. There are also rehab loan products. There haven't been any lenders that I know doing them for a number of years, but they are now starting to come back as being an option to be able to utilize. So if you find a property that is in that area where has maybe a leaky roof, or has some deferred maintenance that needs to be taken care of, or even appliance updates and stuff like that can be included in a rehab loan. So it doesn't have to be in bad condition for you to use a rehab loan product, but that is an option where you can finance the repairs in with the purchase of the home. Another option is to get a co-borrower. So Nick, actually, with his second home purchase, he got some buddies that they had the same idea in mind. And so to lessen their out-of-pocket expense, since it's going to be a part-time usage property anyway, so we can take turns, and you can use it sometimes, I can use it sometimes, and we can share the cost. And both you're gaining the equity together, but you're also sharing the burden. So that's another way of getting in for less money out of pocket, or how you can qualify faster. Bridge loans, that is also an option. Nick will get into more details on the bridge loan option. And then owner contracts is a process where the owner, if they don't have a lien against the property, they can offer to finance you personally. So they usually also will be much shorter term than a 30-year product. So you'll probably be like a 5-year, maybe 10-year term, and then you have to cash them out at the end of that time.
All right, so kind of looking at other ways to source down payments. So we can look what the financing options are, and then what is the ways to come up with the down payment for that. So obviously, if you have the liquid funds and savings available, there you go. But if not, here's some kind of creative ways to bridge that gap. So one is a home equity line of credit. So that's something that's only available on your primary residence, and it depends on your bank and the credit scores, but you can generally borrow up to 95% loan to value, or LTV. So meaning that if your home's worth $100,000, you can't have more than $95,000 of total debt against that property. The rates, it can be variable or fixed. Typically, it's based off of the prime rate, which is set by the federal funds department, plus 2%. So right now, the federal funds have been raising rates, since the beginning of the year, after the longest span of not raising rates. So, so those have been moving. So you may have some folks being more inclined to get a fixed rate on the home equity line versus allowing it to be variable, as rates have been adjusting a lot more right now. But currently, they're averaging 4 to 6%. You can have fixed or balloon repayment terms. So what that means is that you could state that, okay, we're going to borrow this amount, and it's going to be 5.5% fixed for 15 years, and it has a set principal and interest pay down over the course of that 15 years. Or other ways to structure a home equity line is that you only pay when you draw against the line of credit. So let's say if you get a $100,000 line of credit against your home, you only pay against that if you actually start tapping into that line. So you could have it sit there for years and never use it for anything, or you're never having to pay any money because you're not tapping into the debt. It's sort of like a credit card that you have that has a $50,000 credit limit. You only pay on anything you actually purchase with that. But other banks might require that you begin paying right away 1% of the total outstanding balance of the home equity line. So it is a banking product or a credit union product. It's not like a standardized loan like a Fannie or Freddie Mac, Freddie Mae, but so that is something that you kind of need to shop around. They all vary from bank to bank and how they want to structure and what options you may have. But that's kind of generally what you could expect to come into. Most banks also have a max amount of $250,000. Some will allow up to $500,000 in certain scenarios for a home equity line of credit. And then the interest may be tax deductible if you use the line of credit for significant improvements on the subject property that you took the line of credit against. So if you use a line of credit to then go out and buy another home, technically, again, I'm not an accountant, but that does not fall under the deductibility of that. It's designed to be like if you remodeled your kitchen or added a bathroom to your house or things like that, in which case you could then deduct that.
So on a cash out refinance, you can do that on an investment property or on your primary. So that is not any limit on this. You can do 80% loan to value on your primary and 75 on your rental property. So there's, I guess, a little bit of a limit on difference, but not much. It's a fixed rate product. Payments are amortized over the loan. And then with the cash out refinance, you can use that for whatever you want. Nobody's going to come track you down and see what you used it for. So as long as you are in a category that you can deduct your mortgage interest, then you can go ahead and deduct the full amount if you bought a bunch of jet skis.
Yeah, and then some of the benefits of it being amortized over the life of the loan is that the repayment, on a $100,000 cash out refinance versus a $100,000 home equity line of credit, you typically would have a much smaller payment on the cash out refinance because it is spread out over
30 years
life.
Yeah.
Whereas home
and then
equity
also I mentioned before, but they're not taxed as income, so you can use all that money and not have to pay income tax or capital gains tax on it. It's considered a restructuring of your mortgage, so it's not actually income.
Correct. So second mortgages are sort of newly coming back into vogue to sort of adjust to the changing market that we're in. So currently you can get a second mortgage up to 97.5% combined loan to value on your primary residence. Oops. So that means if you have a first mortgage, you can borrow up to that limit on your second mortgage or on your current home up to that 97.5% threshold. On a rental property, you can also take out a second mortgage up to 90% loan to value. So whereas most properties, cash out refinances are limited at 75% for an investment property, or you can't even get a home equity line of credit on an investment property, you can get one with a second mortgage. So interest rates right now are about 7.25%. So they are a little bit higher, but that's on a 30-year fix. So it's amortized over the 30-year life of the loan. And you have the same standard mortgage interest deductions because if it's on your primary residence. Also, the cash out funds are not taxed. It does not impact your current first mortgage. So when rates were super low, a lot of people were just doing a refinance, and maybe they owed a $500,000 on the mortgage and they refinanced and made it a $600,000 loan, but rates were so low, it maybe even dropped their payments based on where the rates were before. Now that rates have been kind of going up quite a bit the last 2 months, you might see less people inclined to want to refinance because they don't want to lose. If they got a 2 or 3% mortgage, they don't want to lose that and have to refinance the whole thing. So this can be a good alternative to keep your current first mortgage at a killer rate and then get a second mortgage that kind of is in second position lien on that. And then those are the current products that we're aware of right now have a limit of up to $250,000. And then so bridge loan is also relatively coming back into play again as well. And so this allows you to buy a new home before selling your current house. So essentially, if you have a lot of equity in your current home, but you don't have the funds for a down payment and you're trying to buy your next home that you want to move into before you sell your current house. The reason for that being if maybe you just want to make sure you know exactly where you're going, maybe you're looking for something really specific, so you're waiting for that right thing to pop up, or maybe you just need to be competitive in the market right now. If you need to sell your home first and make it contingent upon the sale of that home, and you're competing against other buyers that don't have those extra contingencies, it might be tough to win the home you really love. So this might be a way to free up the funds temporarily to then acquire the home you're looking to buy. So with bridge loans, you can get a total combined loan value up to 90%. So again, that means if you have 70% loan to value on a home right now, you could take another 20% out of the property for a bridge loan for down payment on the next home you're trying to buy. Most have a max loan amount of $250,000, and then these are short-term products. So basically, you're designed that you're going to get this loan, buy the home you want, and then immediately or very soon thereafter put your current home on the market, sell it, and then as soon as that home sells, you then pay off this bridge loan. This bridge loan has already been utilized for the down payment on the home you're already now living in. So then that already has been restructured as well. So typically they want that repaid within 6 months. You can extend that for a fee, and then interest rates are pretty favorable. They're 4.5% to 5.5%. And then the tricky part though with bridge loans can be that you need to qualify for your current home, the payment on the new home you're going to buy, and also the payment on the bridge loan. So the debt service on whatever you end up borrowing there. So that can be sometimes the sticking point for a lot of folks, is that maybe you have the equity, but you just income and all the, it's a big whack to try to qualify for the triple whammy like that. So and then stock margin. So this is also a way to sort of temporarily, or as a short-term bridge to free up funds. So a lot of folks, especially in our tech world in the Northwest here, have a lot of stock holdings, whether it's RSUs or vested funds. Maybe you don't want to sell those because now you're going to have to trigger capital gains tax, and maybe you have other bonuses coming at the end of the year. Or maybe you have a lot of equity in your home, but you also have a lot of stock available. And again, you don't want to trigger capital gains sales or get rid of that stock. So stock margin essentially allows you to borrow against the value of the stock that you have. You can borrow up to 50% of the stock holdings value that you have with your brokerage account. It's also very quick capital. Generally, it takes 2 to 3 days to get, and as opposed to 4 to 6 weeks that it might take to do a cash out refinance or a home equity line of credit. It's typically interest only payments, usually around 6 to 7% interest. So payments are usually not very significant either, because it's again, short-term kind of temporary bridge scenario. And again, ideal if you plan to replenish funds. So this is something that I actually did last year on buying a property, because we had a lot of funds tied up on another home that we were fixing up that we were getting ready to sell. My wife and I have been looking for 2 years for a property, on the ocean somewhere, anywhere on the west coast of Washington, basically, and waiting for the right thing to pop up. And sure enough, the most amazing dream place comes up right when all of our money is tied up. And so we ended up doing the margin so we could have the funds for the down payment. After we ended up selling the property that we were fixing up, we paid back the stock margin. So we still have all of the stock holdings as well. And just had a couple months worth of interest payments on that, and then didn't have to pay any of the capital gains tax or lose any of those holdings either. So
Bridging the gap.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Now the power of leverage.
All right, the power of leverage with the down payment. So this is the fun part about buying a house and being able to make your money grow rapidly in that way. When you purchase a primary residence, you can get a home with just 5% down payment. So we're going to go ahead and use 5% down in our little scenario here. So with the 5% down, $25,000 investment, you control a $500,000 asset. Home prices are up 49% over the past 5 years. So with that, we're gonna just do again our modest appreciation of 5% per year. So that's a 25% per year increase. So after 5 years, which I think this much happened just this year for some people, but in 5 years, you've gained 125% or $125,000 in equity. So that $25,000 has created $125,000 in equity, which is a 500% return on your investment.
Oop. And then, yeah, kind of echoing that on the leverage, it's just that if you want to have any kind of return similar to that in the stock market, you need to have that much,
all of that.
$500,000 cash or whatever that might be.
You can only buy as much crypto dollars as crypto dollars convert to.
Yeah.
But you can't.
So yeah, it's one of those few very powerful leverage tools that are out there.
Yes. All right. Short-term rentals like Airbnbs versus the traditional rental. So I happen to have one of each of these, so I'm going to talk on those.
Right.
With a short-term rental, you're generally anticipating you're going to have a higher rate of rental because you're offering a different type of a product. You're kind of competing more with the hotel resort type of rental product versus competing with a traditional homeowner. Also with that, to buy a second home, you can do that with just a 10% down versus if you're buying a traditional rental, you have to put 20 to 25% down. So that's another big difference between the two. With a short-term rental though, you're having a huge amount of turnover. There's people staying just for a few days or for a week here and a week there. Maybe you have a few long-term people, but you're turning things over far faster than your 6 month to 1 year to multiple year tenants that you would have in a traditional lease. So there's a lot more management that's involved in getting through that process. There's also a ton of personal property acquisition and maintenance that goes along with the short-term rental. When you're renting to a traditional renter, you're not supplying toilet paper and shampoo. So there's a lot of extra stuff beyond just the beds and the bedding and keeping things clean in between. There's just a lot of extra moving parts that go along with the short-term rental. Also, rental property management services will be more expensive on a short-term rental than they would be on a traditional rental. Because there's so much hands-on work involved. The property manager will want to get paid for their time, and there's a lot more contractors coming and going to fix things up in between as well. When you are an Airbnb owner, you pay the utilities, and I also provide some internet services to make sure people enjoy their stay and can do their work from home, school stuff. So there's additional services that you have to provide, whereas if it was a traditional rental, my tenant would go ahead and pay for their own utilities, their garbage, their cable, whatever package they want to have for whatever service they wanted to use. The nice thing though with the Airbnb short-term rental version of things is that if you want to use the property, you can. So you could potentially block it out for times that you want to use it and have it for your own use, or if there's amenities with the property that you want to make use of, you can have usage of those amenities. Whereas if you have a traditional rental, if you had a beautiful lake house that you had rented out to a traditional tenant and you showed up in the backyard of that property to go swimming in the lake, they probably would think you were really weird. So it's not generally a share amenities kind of a situation when you're doing a traditional rental.
The other thing too, a short-term rental, you don't get to count any rental income to qualify to purchase the property. So even if you intend to like rent it out all the time and think it's going to make way more money than it would make as a long-term rental, and could be true, the lender won't qualify any of that as a way to offset the debt. So basically you need to be able to qualify for the entire mortgage payment on that property plus whatever home you might currently own or live in as well. So whereas if
there's
the rental
rumors
property,
of products out there coming that could be Airbnb friendly, more Airbnb friendly, but nothing really. You have to kind of buy it as a traditional rental to be able to tap into that.
Yeah, and then if you buy with a traditional rental, they can count, as we mentioned, up to 75% of either the current or forecasted rent for that property.
But currently the interest rate is completely on par, whether you buy a second home or an investment property. The rates are pretty much a point above what owner occupied property would be. So that's exactly the same whether you buy short-term or you buy a traditional rental.
And that's very recent because up until April 1st of this year, second home purchases used to actually have the same mortgage rates as primary residence rates as well. And then during COVID, there's this big surge on buying second homes and resort communities, and people could live and work anywhere, and rates were so attractive that these second home purchases started really filling up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's balance sheets. They got a little leery about that. And so they said, hey, April 1st, we're going to start raising those rates and have potentially higher upfront premiums. Effectively, lenders knew that was coming. And so that kind of was priced in right around February was sort of when we started seeing rates going back up for second home purchases. So
yeah, and lenders weren't the only ones getting wary about the short-term rental surge. There's entire cities that have in still, and they made it so that they're not allowed to have Airbnbs unless you're grandfathered in. So you definitely want to make sure that if you are buying a property with the intention of doing a short-term rental, that you have the right to do so, or if you're doing it naughty, that you know that you're being naughty and you're willing to get away with trying to be naughty.
yeah, and there's a lot of overlays there. It could be the individual subdivision that it's in, or if it's
The
not in a
homeowners
subdivision at all,
association.
it
Hmm.
could be like the county could have an overlay, or it could be the city. So it's yeah, it's you really got to dial that one down deep for sure. The other thing too is that the whole 10% down payment. So your down payment is based upon the conforming loan limits, and the conforming loan limits vary from county to county. So, you know, King County is considered a high cost area. And so as such, the loan limit's nearly 900,000, but many other parts of Washington, for instance, the loan limit's 640,000. So if you're looking at $1 million home in some second resort community or on the beach, that kind of place, you might need to make up the entire difference beyond the loan limit of 640,000 all the way up to the purchase price. So you might, instead of thinking, okay, I'm going to buy this $1 million place with 10% down, you know, $100,000 down payment, you might now need 350,000 down because you have to get all the way down to the conforming loan limit. There
Yeah.
are products available for like what they call a jumbo loan when you get over these loan limits. But to buy a second home or an investment property, that's also a jumbo loan, it starts getting not super attractive. You know, you have as far as rates and fees, and they have, you know, all sorts of requirements of how much you need to have in reserves and all sorts of stuff. So it can get a lot messier if you get beyond those loan limits. It's possible, but just not as ideal.
Yeah, and that's a very good thing to bring up, because a lot of times when you're looking for a short-term, like a property that would be a good short-term rental, you're not looking in a you're not in a specific area, you're looking for a specific appeal. Like Nick was looking for waterfront, he wanted to be on the ocean. I wanted, you know, lakefront. It's you find something that's got that appeal, the log home, the A-frame with a view of something. It could be a mountain view or a water view, but people are going across multiple counties trying to find that property that has that appeal. So they might accidentally get into an area where they are hitting those different loan limits and not realizing it. So that is a very good point to bring up. All right, repair, remodel, and build. So this is the sweat equity topic, which I've sweated out a few. Flips, that's one version of making sweat equity. That's where you buy a home with the intention of fixing it up and selling it for a profit. That profit is taxed as income, so that's the highest taxed option that you can have out there, and it's also the highest risk option. To take on a whole property, you're taking all the risk of if anything goes wrong. You have a timeline that you're probably trying to work against almost always, because usually you're borrowing some hard money, or you just want to get out of it and turn it as fast as possible. So it's usually high pressure, high risk, and the reward can come, but there's a number of times, most people I know that have done flips have had a bad one. So you have to just know that there's probably going to be a bad one in the mix when you're going through that. Financing challenges with fixer homes. So I did kind of touch on that earlier. That's why people would tend to use a hard money for a flip property, is because you can't use a traditional loan product on a house that's about to fall over. They just won't do it. Buy, rehab, rent, and refinance. So when you if you buy a house that needs to be worked on, what you can do is you can do the hard money loan or some short-term plan of financing it, get it fixed up, and then once you get a tenant in there, you can use 75% of that rental income to refinance. You can use that to offset when you refinance and make your debt to income ratios better and your rates better. Also, when you're doing a rehab, the rough math they say is if it's a total fixer, that's a real bad one, is usually between $50 and $75 per foot for fix-up costs. Another way you can build equity in a property is by putting an addition or an ADU conversion. So you could either add on to the property by expanding up, add another floor, add outwards, or you could also potentially convert space into like an ADU. So oftentimes you'll see a garage, a detached garage. It's very common in Seattle city limits, as well as in Tacoma, where you have kind of an alleyway garage access from behind, and people will convert that garage into a studio, and then you can actually rent that out as a separate unit if you do it as a legal ADU. And then there's also the possibility of converting that even further into a condo, and then you could sell them as separate properties. So you will actually see those little tiny houses in Seattle, and it's like, wait, why is it a condo? It looks like a little baby house. It is, but it's a condo, and that's how they can sell them as a separate entity, is by breaking it up into, instead of having to do a lot line adjustment, you can do a condo conversion and create two separate tax parcels. And then building, I got to do that on accident because my house burnt down. But when you don't accidentally acquire a piece of land to build on, finding the land to be able to build is a huge part of the process in doing a build. And land can generally, I mean, anything that's you can build on is probably going to cost you a couple $100,000 for the dirt. Anything less than that's probably going to need some work to get it to the point where you'll be able to have utilities and the things that you need to be able to actually build on the property. And then in order to get a construction loan, they generally want to see at least have water and power on the property before they will even finance anything further or even let you acquire the property. Feasibility studies. So when you do go to acquire a piece of land, you generally want to go through a feasibility study process, unless somehow the seller has already done a bunch of the research for you and has already told you everything you need to know. You basically need to take time to figure out if there's any wetlands, any critical slopes, anything that's going to be a challenge with being able to build on the property, so you can determine what the real value for the property is. So there's a process there when you go to buy land where you actually will be in limbo for quite some time and probably spending some money having studies done to determine if the property is buildable. And if you determine the property is not buildable, unfortunately that money is gone and you don't get the property. And then once you figured out that it's all good and you want to start building, it's the permitting process and all that stuff. So once you do get the lot and you're ready to start going to getting plans and going to build, you're probably still another year out before you'll have potentially a house, probably a year and a half.
Yeah, it's not a quick process here. It's not like we see on TV where there's a house 60 days later. Maybe they can do that in Texas, but definitely not here.
Not in Washington. Yes, that is true, because it is different in different states. So we do have to make sure, because if you had a piece of dirt that was in the middle of Arizona and I had water and power to it, you could give it a price and sell them all day long without a feasibility study. But around here we have a lot of wetlands, a lot of creeks, a lot of salmon that need to be protected, and so we have to make sure that we're not putting anything down the streams that we're not supposed to.
Another topic that we're not kind of diving on too much right now would be buying foreclosed properties at the auction. So the delinquency rate is at an all-time low since they started tracking them in 2001 in terms of mortgage delinquencies that eventually lead to actual foreclosures. And then home equity is at an all-time high. So even if people were delinquent, there's a lot of people that aren't upside down. You know, if they got, in a tough spot, they could sell the home, take a boatload of equity, make the bank right, and what have you. But that said, a few years back, we did host a class all about how to buy homes at the foreclosure auction, had case studies on how to remodel that. So we can send out to everybody the link to that video as well.
Yeah, it's just not quite relevant because it's finding a good foreclosure opportunity is going to be pretty tough these days.
They don't hit the courthouse steps as much. Yeah, so it's every Friday is when they take them to auction. But so looking at kind of different property options for investment. So condominiums, multifamily, and ADUs. So condo, it's where you have a unit with shared common areas. Some of the advantages of that is that is a lot less that you have to specifically be personally involved in. You know, the all the common elements, the walls, windows. You know, you're basically responsible for the sheetrock in. So, but everything else is sort of the homeowners association responsibility. That does come with a cost. You pay homeowners dues, and you don't get to really control the homeowners dues. The other thing with the homeowners dues is that they also fund future expenses. So, you know, the roof will get replaced 30 years down the road. So you start funding it now so that you're not just having to have a big lump sum payment 30 years from now. So if you're planning on owning the property for 5 years, you might be paying towards future improvements that you don't really realize. But it does give a little bit more ability to set it and forget it versus like a house on acreage or something where you need to worry about, are the tenants taking care of the lawn, or do you have to hire landscapers, or do you have to replace the roof and it's going to cost you $20,000 and more potentials for single large sum expenses. But you don't have the fixed revolving expense of homeowners dues that come with that. So also there can be governance that comes with the condos. So sometimes they can regulate how many properties are allowed to be rented. They might state, you know, only 50% of the, or, you know, 20% of the units can be rented out or something to that effect. They can also limit how long you could rent the property out. It's common for condos to stipulate no short-term or time sharing of units, no Airbnbs, that type of thing. There's a handful of units or condo buildings downtown that do allow that, and you see that very commonly done in those buildings. But otherwise, most usually require that it's usually a 6-month or 12-month lease on the property. Some also have requirements that you occupy the property for at least a year before you rent it out. That's more typical with like single family subdivisions, where they don't want somebody to just buy up a bunch of properties and investments as an investment, wait for them to get built over the next 12 months. And over that 12-month period, they've appreciated a bunch, and then they put a boatload of tenants in there. You know, they're generally trying to build communities and owners that are going to be there. So that's sometimes something you need to watch for as well. So, and then as Chelsea mentioned earlier, you can also, there's ways to convert properties into condominiums, whether that's a single family home with a detached unit or attached unit that's a house but becomes a condo, or something that might look a little more straightforward where it's like a fourplex, you know, a 4-unit building or a 2-unit or 3-unit building, where you then convert it into a condo, and then you could sell each unit individually. Maybe you keep one and sell 2 as a way to sort of recapitalize and get money out of the investment. So there's a lot of ways to sort of diversify that investment.
Yeah, there's definitely some areas where a duplex is significantly easier to afford than 2 separate condos. So if you find a duplex that you can convert into 2 condos, and it with some improvements with it, it can totally make sense to be able to convert that into a profitable situation. But right, so multifamily property is a property that has multiple doors. So that is like the duplex, triplex, and also a fourplex. Anything that's 5 units or more is actually not considered conforming for loan lending. So they actually require commercial financing. So you wouldn't be able to get the traditional Freddie Fannie owner occupied options on those. But 4 units or less, you can. And if you occupy one of the units, you can take up to 75% of the anticipated rental income, or like if we have the lease signed, we can use the actual lease rental income. There's no HOA, so that's nice, but you're, as the owner, is responsible for the entire maintenance of the entire project. So the owner maintains everything from the exterior and the landscaping on all the common areas. But that can be converted into a condo if we wanted to.
Yeah, and that's a mega leverage move for sure. I mean, a 4-unit loan limit is like almost $2 million. In terms of like, you have 5% down on a $2 million 4-unit purchase for 100 grand down. You live in 1 unit, rent the other 3. You're in there for way less than if you had to come up with 25% down of a $2 million. You know, you'd have $500,000 down conversely. So that's one option to think about if you're willing to cohabitate.
Yeah, in that scenario, I might use a property manager to avoid being the person that has to interface with the tenants that are living around me.
Give me my money.
Maybe not let them know that I was the owner. Like, oh, that owner is so annoying. Oh, that property management company though, they're great. All
Incognito.
right, condominium. Okay, so now we're on ADUs. So ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. There's also a DADU, you may have heard of, which is detached accessory dwelling unit. So with these types of properties, it's still on one piece of property. So it's like your house, and then maybe your garage has a little studio in it. That's a separate legal dwelling unit. But even though it's a legal ADU, the lender will not count a rental income unless it's years later and it's on your income taxes. And then you can use that when you qualify later on. That's already been as taxable income, but they will not count that as anticipated income to offset when you're going to qualify. So if you have a lovely little studio garage, unfortunately, the rent help will help you pay your mortgage, but it won't help you qualify for the mortgage. But it is a great mortgage helper. A mother-in-law apartment is also a similar idea where it's a separate space, but you're all on one property. But you could have a little mortgage helper living in the basement. You can convert an ADU into a condominium, and then detach the DADUs are the things in Seattle that I was mentioning before. You're seeing kind of more of those little baby houses that are condos with just the smallest HOA for 2 houses.
I didn't mean to skip ahead there. So kind of wrapping up here. So if you had an investment property, what are some of the ways to manage it? So one, you can obviously manage it yourself. There it depends on where that is, how sound of an idea that is. I will say, like Seattle, for instance, it's you're walking on eggshells, and you just feel like you have a prosecution around every corner when you're a landlord. So it's a very tenant friendly. I would definitely lean towards getting property management just so you have the legal guidance and advice on how to navigate all of that. But so kind of what your options look like if you have a long-term rental, like a 6 or 12-month lease or traditional rental property. Typically, if you want full service management, the management fees between 8 to 12%. That includes them collecting the rent. They'll coordinate, if they need to get repairs done, any of the legal liabilities, as I mentioned, coordinating evictions, and they'll be the main point of contact for the tenant. So you're not having to be the one talking to them directly. It can be tough, because these are real people and have real life things going on. And so whether or not, how much you want to be the direct contact or liaison for that. So sometimes it's helpful to just sort of separate that. So
well, that's also it's stressful and disruptive too. I mean, I had to evict a tenant, and I was just extra stressed in the back of my mind on a daily basis. So to have somebody else just knowing it's their problem and not your problem can be a lot better.
Burden, yeah. Also, they can help with the initial tenant placement. So some management companies will allow you to just have them do the initial tenant placement, where they do all the screening, they meet them at the property, do the credit and background check for you, and then get the lease all executed on your behalf. And then after that you want to manage it yourself, typically they'll just collect the first month's rent, and then you don't have the ongoing residual management costs. So some management companies allow to break up those services. Some require that you do both. It just really depends. And then short-term rental management is also a very mixed bag, ranging from 10 to 50% of your revenue, because again, that depends on how much you want them to do. Sometimes they'll coordinate everything. They restock the supplies, they have the cleaner, they manage all of your calendars, set the variable pricings for weekdays versus weekends and surge rates. Some will even design and decorate and furnish the property for you. So there's a lot of ways to approach that. Other ones are if you just want to have somebody that's coordinating the calendar, if you want, or knowing how to do the price premium. So you're not just doing a flat rate all day, every day, knowing how to take advantage of that, because they have that data at their fingertips and know how to optimize that. So the big thing though, if you want to self-manage, is getting a really good cleaner, and also
and landscaper.
And a landscaper, yeah, and then having lots of plan Bs in case the cleaner bails on you or the toilet's backed up, and if the property's 5 hours away, what are you going to do? So that was also in the back of my mind. And when I was looking, I wanted something 2.5 hours away at the max from where I live. Also, I have 2 little kids, and that's like the edge of the world for how long they can put up with being in a car. And so I wanted something that was real world, that I would actually use it, and not just never look at it or only be an investment, so that was part of a driver there too. But so Vacasa is a very popular, they're a nationwide company, management company that does specifically vacation rental management. But they can help with sort of that screening as well. So that is our Building Wealth 101. So
Oh my gosh,
a couple questions.
It's 7:59.
Look at that. That was pretty.
How
This is the most punctual the Jerusalem has ever
ever?
been.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a true statement. But so questions, Bill. So yes, we should be able to shoot out a copy of the PowerPoint to everybody. New owners, when's the most opportune time to refi? It really depends on what loan you have right now. If you got a loan in January of last year in the mid 2s,
don't ever refi.
You might not want to touch that unless, you might want to look at pulling equity out other ways without restructuring that. If you bought a home in 2018 and at 5% and haven't refinanced since, then maybe you have some good options to look at. So it really is a case by case for sure. But excuse me, we should be able to shoot out the playback of this to everybody as well as the slides. So appreciate everybody tuning in. You can always call, text, or visit us online at happyhometeam.com.
happyhometeam.com. Thanks everybody. Have a great day, or I guess night.